There are Boeing 747s flying over Tehran today that, by every rule of modern aviation, should not exist. No authorized spare parts, no manufacturer support, no software updates from Seattle, no Federal Aviation Administration oversight for over 40 years. These aircraft should be in museums or scrapyards. Instead, they're boarding passengers tonight. An entire national fleet has been kept airborne through 4 decades of the harshest sanctions regime in modern history. We know the planes are still flying. What almost nobody can explain is how. To understand how absurd this is, you have to go back to when Iran was Boeing's dream customer. In the 1970s, Iran Air wasn't just buying jets, it was shaping them. Boeing built a special variant of the 747, the 747 SP, partly because Iran Air demanded a jet that could fly non-stop from Tehran to New York. The Shah's airline had one of the most advanced wide-body fleets on Earth. American engineers walked freely through Mehrabad Airport. Spare parts moved across the Atlantic on weekly cargo runs. Then, almost overnight, all of it stopped, and what replaced it is one of the strangest engineering stories in aviation history, a shadow aerospace industry hiding inside a sanctioned economy. Then, on one morning in 1979, the phone lines went dead. The Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah. American embassy staff became hostages. Washington's response was swift and absolute. Executive orders froze Iranian assets. The Treasury Department banned every US company from selling anything aviation-related to the new regime. Boeing couldn't ship a single rivet. General Electric couldn't send a turbine blade. Honeywell couldn't transmit a line of avionics code. Iran Air's brand new wide bodies, worth billions in today's money, suddenly had no lifeline. Every commercial jet has a lifespan measured not in years, but in cycles, pressurizations, landings, heat cycles through the engines. Without parts, a fleet dies in roughly 5 years. Therefore, Iran faced a countdown. By 1984, the best estimates said the fleet would be grounded. But it wasn't grounded. The 747s kept flying. The 707s kept flying. The 727s kept flying. A small army of Iranian engineers, most trained in the United States before the revolution, began doing something the industry considered impossible. They started keeping a Boeing fleet alive without Boeing, and the methods they developed would eventually stretch across 3 continents. Because somewhere between Dubai and Tehran, aircraft started disappearing. In the years that followed, retired American and European jets began vanishing mid-flight. An aircraft supposedly sold for cargo conversion in Central Asia would taxi to a runway, lift off, climb to cruise altitude, and then its transponder would go dark. Hours later, the same airframe would appear at Mehrabad wearing fresh Iranian paint. The mechanism was elegant. A shell company registered in the United Arab Emirates would buy a retired wide-body from a Western leasing firm, claiming it was destined for a cargo conversion in Central Asia. Paperwork was flawless. Payment cleared. The jet left Western airspace. Therefore, nobody chased it. But the plane never reached its stated destination. It landed in Tehran, and within weeks, it was being systematically cannibalized. Landing gear stripped, engines pulled, avionics harvested, hydraulic lines catalogued. A $40 million aircraft sacrificed to keep 4 others airborne. US investigators traced dozens of these disappearances. In 2014, the Treasury Department sanctioned a network of 9 front companies funneling parts through Dubai. They shut it down. Another network appeared within months, this time routing through Turkey, then Armenia, then Tajikistan. The game never stopped, but smuggling alone could not sustain a fleet for 40 years. There had to be something else, and when American intelligence finally looked closely at Iranian aviation facilities, they found something that shocked them. Iran had built its own aerospace industry. In workshops outside Tehran and Shiraz, engineers were 3D scanning Boeing components, analyzing the metallurgy, and machining unauthorized replacements on domestic CNC equipment. They were writing their own maintenance manuals, running their own heavy structural checks, manufacturing bootleg turbine blades, entirely blind from Seattle, entirely illegal under international aviation law, entirely effective. which raises a question nobody in Washington wants to answer. If the sanctions were supposed to ground Iran's fleet, why are those jets still flying? The math should have killed them decades ago. The average Iranian commercial jet is over 25 years old. Some 747s in active service have been flying for over 40 years, outliving the original airlines that bought them. By every actuarial model the aviation industry uses, the accident rate should be catastrophic. It isn't. Iran has had tragic accidents, but the baseline crash rate for its large Boeings is dramatically lower than statistical models predict for aircraft operating without manufacturer support. Aviation analysts who've studied the data quietly admit something uncomfortable. 20th century Boeing engineering was so conservative, so overbuilt, so redundant, that the airframes will tolerate almost anything thrown at them. The jets were designed to survive the Cold War. They're surviving this too. Therefore, the sanctions produced an outcome Washington never anticipated. Instead of grounding Iranian aviation, they forced Iran to develop one of the most resourceful maintenance cultures on Earth. Engineers who would have been Boeing customers became Boeing's unauthorized replacements. The ghost fleet flies on. The workshops hum. The shell companies rotate. But the smuggled parts are only half the story. Because the real trap wasn't built in 1979, it was built much more recently, and it closed around Iran when they least expected it. In July 2015, something extraordinary happened. Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal. For the first time in 36 years, the doors to Western aviation cracked open, and Iran's response revealed exactly how desperate the situation had become. Within months, Iran Air signed a deal with Boeing for 80 aircraft, then a deal with Airbus for 118 more. Regional carriers piled on. The total came to over 200 aircraft, worth roughly $38 billion. It was the largest single aviation shopping spree of the decade. The first Airbus A321 arrived in Tehran in January 2017, painted in Iran Air livery. Photographs flooded social media. Engineers who had spent their entire careers reverse engineering parts stood on the tarmac and watched a brand new factory-fresh jet taxi to the gate. For a moment, it looked like the 40-year siege was ending. Then came May 8, 2018. President Trump walked to a podium and announced the United States was withdrawing from the nuclear deal. The Treasury Department revoked every export license. Boeing's order cancelled. Airbus's order cancelled. The 3 aircraft Iran had already received were allowed to stay. Every other jet in the pipeline stopped in place. But this time was different. This time the trap had teeth the 1979 embargo never had. This is where the sanctions stopped being a punishment and became a cage. Because by 2018, the global aviation supply chain had become something nobody could escape. Here's the detail that matters. When Airbus looked at whether it could legally keep selling to Iran without American permission, it couldn't. Every modern Airbus jet contains more than 10% American-made components. The engines on an A320 are built by CFM International, a joint venture involving General Electric. The avionics come from Honeywell and Rockwell Collins. Under the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control rules, any aircraft with more than 10% US content requires American export approval. Therefore, Airbus was legally bound by Washington just as tightly as Boeing. Iran turned east. China's state-owned manufacturer Comac had just unveiled the C919, a narrow-body jet positioned as the first real challenger to the Boeing-Airbus duopoly. On paper, it was perfect. A sanction-proof supplier from a country that ignored US aviation rules. But when Iranian procurement teams examined the C919 closely, they discovered the same trap. The engines were CFM LEAP, half American, the avionics American, the flight controls American. Nearly every critical system on the Chinese jet fell under US export control. Comac couldn't sell to Iran either, not without Washington's permission, not without triggering secondary sanctions that would cripple China's own aviation ambitions. Iran had been trapped by an invisible architecture. The global aviation industry had consolidated so tightly around American technology that there was no back door left. No Chinese option, no Russian option. The old Soviet Tupolev's Iran, once considered, had proven so unreliable that the government banned their commercial use after a string of fatal crashes. So the engineers went back to the workshops, the ghost jets kept flying, the shell companies kept rotating, and a fleet that was supposed to last 5 years entered its 45th. So the fleet keeps flying, and every year it gets older. Aviation analysts estimate Iran needs 400 to 500 new aircraft immediately just to modernize its domestic and regional network. The existing fleet is operating past every manufacturer's recommended service life. Mahan Air, blacklisted by the US Treasury for alleged ties to Iran's Revolutionary Guard, still operates international routes to destinations in Venezuela, China, and Russia. Nobody can stop them, nobody can supply them either. The workshops keep scanning, engineers keep writing unauthorized maintenance manuals. Shell companies in new countries keep appearing faster than Treasury can sanction them. In 2022, investigators traced Iranian parts procurement networks operating through Serbia, Oman, and 3 Central Asian republics simultaneously. Every time one network collapsed, 2 more opened. Boeing watches from Seattle, Airbus watches from Toulouse. Both manufacturers maintain contingency plans for the day sanctions lift, updated quarterly, reviewed by lawyers in 3 countries. Because when that door opens, whoever moves first captures a market worth potentially $100 billion over 2 decades. And here's the detail that almost nobody mentions. The Iranian engineers who've spent 40 years keeping these jets alive have built something valuable. A complete shadow aerospace capability, reverse engineering expertise, domestic manufacturing, an MRO industry operating without any Western oversight whatsoever. If sanctions lift tomorrow, Iran doesn't just become a customer again, it becomes a competitor, a country that learned to build aviation parts because it had no other choice. And somewhere in a workshop outside Tehran, someone is machining a 747 component right now that Boeing didn't authorize and can't legally acknowledge exists. Nobody knows how much longer the fleet can hold. The engineers keep working, the sanctions keep tightening, the jets keep flying into their 5th decade of a life that was never supposed to last this long.